Yeah, I'm Tom Walker. I work for Inner Fight here in Dubai in the Middle East. I'm an endurance coach and a performance coach with a degree in sports science. I'm also undertaking a master's in performance psychology. And endurance sports really, really interests me alongside high performance, which is a bit of a buzzword these days. But I help people really achieve what they set out to want to achieve. That's the difference, I would say. High performance is great, but really we just want any sort of performance. And I mainly help people in a coaching aspect to do that. I first got into endurance sports once I stopped playing rugby. I needed a sport that I could do on my own terms in my own time without reliance on a team or too much equipment. So I started running first, and running always leads to I think cycling. And while I was already working at the time, I was working as a lifeguard, so I was doing a lot of swimming. And then at a certain point, I realized actually I can fit all these three together and start to do triathlon. But really, endurance sports began for me with running. And it was during that shift into from running into triathlon that I started to coach endurance athletes. So I was a strength coach, and then I started to see actually a lot of the way that these endurance athletes move. They could do a lot better with their movement, and it could help prevent a lot of injuries. So as I started working as a strength coach with more endurance athletes, I started to do various courses, and eventually a degree in applied sports science that helped me to be able to take an endurance athlete from zero to achieving Ironman to ultra distance races, and not just getting them there in terms of fitness from a cardiovascular standpoint, but getting them there strong, healthy, and in a position to thrive during the event rather than just survive it.
Great.
With a wide range of athletes. As I said in the introduction, my interest is working with people who want to achieve something, and that might not be a crazy high performance goal. It could just be the performance of waking up excited for your day, getting a training session done, being good to your family, getting to work, performing well in work, and getting home feeling satisfied. Contrast that with the athlete who wants to go to a world championships in an endurance event, typically within a triathlon event. It's someone who wants to achieve, and that doesn't mean that they might be ready to achieve, but they know that they want more from what they're doing. That's the kind of athletes that is drawn to me. My coaching philosophy is first of all built through listening, and that's the most important skill I think as a coach, is to really listen to your athletes and understand what they're looking for, and then understand what they're feeling, really what they're saying, and how they're acting. So I listen first, and then I start to ask some questions to dig a bit deeper, figure out the true motive behind what the athlete wants to do, or behind what the person really wants to do. And then it's a case of shaping a plan together that helps the athlete to thrive, as I say, not survive, but thrive. So not just, I always say with my athletes, I never want them turning up to a start line or going into work, into a meeting or whatever it is, and your house is on fire. We should have a happy home life. We should be able to have good friendships. We should be able to be living alongside striving to be our best within a performance context. So first of all, I listen, then I ask some questions, and then I build a plan as ethically as I can around the person achieving what they want to in a way that helps them to have something to come back to and celebrate their achievement with. In order to know how much we should be recovering, we need to know how much we've been training, and recovery input should really match our training output. So we actually get fitter when we're recovering. So if we're training really hard, but we're not paying attention to recovery, okay, great, we're training hard, but we're not actually getting the gains that we want to be getting, that we think we're getting when we're training. So training often breaks us down. It breaks down our tissue, breaks down the muscle, which most people know, which then builds back stronger, and that's how we get more muscle and get stronger. It's similar on an endurance side. We switch on different types of muscle fiber, which some are more fit to endurance, slow twitch, fast twitch. We break down the slow twitch more, it comes back with having more slow twitch fiber in a very basic context. But that only happens if we allow it to happen during our recovery period. So there's micro bouts of recovery, which is sort of your day-to-day, making sure you get great sleep, making sure post-session that you give time to allow your body to absorb nutrients and obviously eat, and take on board fuel ready for the next session. But then we have longer term recovery, which is your chronic sort of ability to sleep, your chronic health in terms of, again, comes back to nutrition and how you treat your body from the inside out. And often we can get quite good at the shorter recovery stuff. It's not hard for people to get their heads around, taking whatever, a protein shake or resting on the sofa in the evenings, stuff like that. But we forget about the long term, which is allowing yourself good, proper downtime, periodizing our training, periodizing our nutrition, making sure that we get great sleep all the time, not just on a few nights a week. So recovery really is such an important piece. And I think, to be honest, it's as important as, if we're looking at big picture, your recovery is as important as the training. Because if we don't get recovery right over a long period of time, we will end up burned out, injured, sick. We won't be in the sport for too long. Term or longevity with endurance sports, we have to think in a long-term pattern. Often I chat with people, we break our training down into training blocks. We know what we want to achieve within the training block. And the first thing we want to achieve within a training block is to avoid injury and illness. So we're always training, fueling, recovering based on the next training session, and not thinking really short-sighted on that training session right there, right now. We do want to think like that when it's really hard and we just need to get through the session. But let's say, for example, in endurance sports, particularly, you have an easy run, let's say, and we often run really easy in endurance sports because that helps to build our endurance, helps to build resilience for the run. However, if we're in a rush and we do that run too hard, and in the context of our week, we're not allowing enough recovery, then the following week you'll be too tired for the other runs that you have. So we're always thinking, is this run helping me to achieve my next session, or is this bike, or is this swim? I use running as an example because it's quite easy to run too fast too quickly, and it's often the easiest sport to get injured in. So we always want to be looking, how do we stop losing out on more training in our races? And the other thing with endurance sports, sort of not like, for example, tennis, where you might play a lot of games. In tennis season, you might play a game every week. Well, in endurance sport, often we have 2 or 3 key races per year. So we have to try and predict, how do we get you in the best shape for that exact day? And that takes a more of a periodization plan over just, let's keep showing up and we're given another try on the next go. Because if you miss a go in endurance, that's potentially you've missed a chance at the race that you wanted to do, and you've got to wait a whole nother year to get around to do it. So being in a position to perform at your best, it's an absolute art within endurance to be able to try and predict, number one, how we get you there healthy and fit as possible, and number two, how we make sure we maximize the training before it, so that you pushing as much as you can, but not pushing over the edge. That means that you need to take more recovery days, which means you could possibly not get the best benefit from that training block. Recommend sort of one key marker to be looking at for recovery would probably be heart rate variability, HRV. I've used this in a few different forms in the past through, for example, just an app on the phone using the camera or a heart rate strap. I've used a Whoop band. I've used ultra-human ring. You can measure it in many different ways, but the key thing is that you measure it, and you measure it consistently over time. And what the HRV, or your heart rate variability, tells us is the state of your body's nervous system. And often it's misconstrued that heart rate variability will predict your performance for that day, but actually that's not true. HRV will predict your ability to absorb stress on that day. So we've seen it in the past where athletes have woken up to a race day and their heart rate variability is very low, which is what we don't want. So that that shows that they're in a fight or flight system, which is actually very normal for a race day. And they think, oh, well, I'm not going to perform well today. And then they go out and they perform really well. Now, that's not unsurprising, because when we're in fight or flight, we should perform very well. We're in a position to be able to run fast, push hard, get away from the danger. But what it does mean is that that stress that you took on that day will hit you very hard. And so the following day, we'll often notice that heart variability goes even lower. And then it starts to come back up as we rest for the rest of that week. If we're in a training block and we're noticing heart variability is trending downwards, and we know that we have another 3 weeks more work to do in training, then that's the point where the little red warning flag comes up and we say, okay, we need to just ease back here. We need to allow the body to catch back up with itself. We need to allow the nervous system to recover so it can absorb the rest of the training that it's got to do within the block. So it's a really, really useful tool to be using. If you can't do heart variability, which nowadays it's very accessible, resting heart rate is another great indicator. And if you can't do that, then just literally how do you feel in the morning is a really powerful indicator of how you slept, of how you fueled the day before, how you hydrated. So they're the recovery tools that I'd say from a metric standpoint work really well. In terms of like actual recovery tools, then nutrition and sleep have to be the biggest we can get. So a good night's sleep will really, really help recovery. A week's worth of great sleep, you're going to be feeling an absolute $1 million. A month's worth of great sleep, you're taking over the world. Great sleep is really, really important. And it's the same thing with nutrition. So you obviously have a high output when training for endurance. Your calorie burn is very high. You've got not just a muscle breakdown element to it, but you've also got a glycogen usage element to it as well. So how you refuel your body is very, very important. And we never want to be in more than a sort of 3 to 5% deficit when we're training for a performance goal within endurance, because any more than that, you're really starting to let the thread unravel, and you're definitely looking at some point either having to dial back your volume or intensity of training, or you're going to get sick or injured. You won't sleep as well. So we're always looking to try and sort of have even match on calories in versus calories out. And then how those calories are made up of course, as well, is really important. And I think within endurance specifically, often athletes are under recovered because they get the protein element wrong. They think that carbohydrates are the key source to recovery, which they help, but actually carbohydrates are the key source to performance. Protein is the key source to recovery, not just because we know it from a strength training standpoint, but we often forget it within an endurance training standpoint. I first came across Unbroken thanks to Sara Sigmundsdottir, who is best friends with my wife. And she was here in Dubai one day, staying with us. And I think I was suffering from an Achilles injury. And she said, Tom, you've got to try this Unbroken. And I was sort of very skeptical at the start. It didn't make much sense to me. I didn't really understand the product as I do now. And I said, yeah, I already take protein, and I eat a lot of protein in my diet. And she said, no, this is different. It's an immediate absorption. It's, there's no cost to digesting it. And I was like, yeah, but she goes, just try it. And I initially started drinking it. And a lot of people laugh at this because I love the old flavor. The original flavor was my favorite. But what I started to realize after a few weeks was actually my energy levels were coming up, and I was able to drink this drink, and I would use it in the mornings and lasting at night. And my fluid consumption was starting to get a bit easier to have because I liked the taste of it. It had some B vitamins in. I think even a little bit of electrolytes are in there, and I started feeling really, really good. And my wife was taking it as well, and we both were like, we're a big fan of this. So I then used it non-stop basically for 2 years, and during that time, I can't remember a time that I got sick, and slowly, and a number of other reasons contributed to it, but I started to fix my injuries. And I think the chronic usage of a product like Unbroken started to have really big effects for me. And it's sort of more noticeable when you stop taking it. You realize things don't recover as fast. You might not feel as as good in yourself, and then you start taking it again, and you realize, oh yeah, this product this product can work alongside getting your other real basic building blocks of recovery in. This is like a very, very good cherry on top to have. So I used it. I took a dosage in the morning and I took one in the evening. So it was the first thing I drank in the day and it was the last thing I drank in the evening. And yeah, it was a really, really big fan of it. So it was because of Sara that I got introduced to it. In terms of data, I'd have to go back and look at how my data changed, but I remember for the 2 years using it, and it was at a time where I was pushing really hard within my triathlon training. My goal was going under 9 hours at an Ironman called Challenge Roth. I remember just during that time in that particular training block, I just wasn't getting ill. I was sleeping really well and I was recovering really well, and it just meant that I could show up the next day and train. And I just remember putting together about 5 or 6 months of training and you just feel invincible because of it. Whereas in the past, I'd get injured at some point or I'd get sick at some point, or I'd have a time where sleep was not great. Generally, like mood wasn't great. So I just know that the correlation of when I was taking the Unbroken product to when I was training at my hardest for this particular goal, everything just seemed to click really, really well. And of course, we can't say for certain it was just because of the product, but it was definitely helping me because I felt it in my recovery and in my performance as well. In an endurance program is not a nice to have, it's a must have. If you find an endurance program that doesn't include some mobility and movement or strength training, recovery routines, then it's probably not a great endurance program. Often mobility and movement can be built into warm-ups or like cool downs of a session, which is a really good way to start and finish a session. But also at certain points in the season, we might need dedicated days to strength and mobility. Normally, I would call it strength training, and within that strength training session, there is mobility movements and sort of general, what I would call undoing the training movements. So as cyclists, you're in a hunched over static shoulder and hip position for a very long time. So we don't do much lateral movement. We want to move laterally outside of the sport to keep our range of movement. Obviously, day-to-day happens, even if you just think of the movement of getting into your car. It's actually a very complex, single leg lateral movement. And if you train a lot all day in one plane of motion, and then you go to get in your car, you'll feel, oh, that feels really quite stiff. So we're sort of movement and mobility within endurance training is there to do what you're not doing in swim, bike, and run to help keep your health and longevity within life up. It's also a big one is injury prevention. So making sure that the tendons and the muscles that we use a lot are getting a different stimulus to a repetitive sort of low intensity movement. So for example, runners actually would really want them to be doing very heavy calf raises. That is a great thing to elicit the type 2 muscle fiber in the lower leg, which makes the lower leg become more robust and helps you to actually take on more load, which means runners can run more or harder. Cyclists, they might do 3 hours of cycling. Their quads get very good at performing a low amount of sort of a low power movement over and over again for a very long time. So with them, I like to build them up to being really strong over, say, 3 to 4 reps. And again, building a different part of the muscle fiber that they don't get when they are cycling. And then obviously for all athletes really, but especially endurance, your core work. So looking after the spine, keeping the spine healthy, making sure that we can do flexion, extension, transverse movements. So we're rotating well because we don't rotate a lot within endurance sports, but actually to be a good swimmer, you need great spinal rotation, you need good shoulder mobility. So there's absolutely endless ways to fit mobility and movement into an endurance program, but you have to prioritize it. And it comes back to the periodization part of the puzzle, which is at certain points in your season, you need to focus more on the mobility and movement and the strength work over the endurance work. And obviously, if we're 3 weeks out from your biggest race, if there's one thing you can do in your week, it should be whatever's specific to your race. But hopefully when we're in the coaching process, we have all that planned out beforehand and we know what's coming up and we know what area we need to work on. if I'm recommending Unbroken to people, I think people often think it's you drink it like a protein shake, which you can do, so immediately post exercise. But I actually would recommend more of using the sort of everyday protocol, morning and evening. So you drink it first thing in the morning, and then you drink it last thing in the evening. This way that you know your body is so your body's been in sleep. You've not been getting in nutrients or any nutrition while you're sleeping, hopefully, unless you sleep walking and sleep eating. So starting off your morning with an immediate hit of amino acids, free-form amino acids into your bloodstream, which actually can even be great for people who like fasting. So one of the dangers of fasting is a reduction in muscle resynthesis. Unbroken being so low in calories and not having a metabolic cost means that you can get fuel into your muscles, but without any sugar spike whatsoever. So you keep the benefits of fasting. And then last thing at night, you know that you're getting, again, a nice dose of free-form amino acids into your bloodstream as you're going to head off to sleep. And for some people who like to eat their meal early, so let's say 3 hours before they sleep, and the digestion process has already happened or is well underway by the time you get to go to sleep, it's a great product to just have a drink before bed. It means you know you're gonna go into sleep fully hydrated because you're having it with water, but you also know that your body has a surplus of amino acids to be using to rebuild muscle, and that doesn't just mean rebuild bigger muscle, which endurance athletes are scared of, any form of hypertrophy. Like when you say rebuilding the muscle, you mean you're rebuilding the strength of the muscle, not the size of the muscle. The only way you'll grow the size of your muscle is through hypertrophic training, so lifting weights often, but most endurance athletes aren't doing that. So actually anything to do with muscle recovery is about recovering the strength of the muscle, not the size of the muscle. I think, yeah, there is. I think one thing I would tell athletes I get a lot of questions around recovery, and like you said, what's some great metrics we can use. The best metric we know for recovery is how you're feeling and your attitude towards your training. And when you feel good, when your nutrition's great, when your sleep's great, you turn up to training excited. You wake up with energy, you turn up to training excited. This is a good sign that you're recovering really well. If training feels really hard and it feels like a chore and it feels like your body is never going to feel good again, something within your recovery protocol is not going well. And that's the biggest sign. Doesn't matter what your HRV is saying, it doesn't matter what your heart rate's saying, doesn't matter how many ice baths you do. Your attitude and your happiness around training is going to be the biggest telltale sign of how you're recovering from it. So I'd say that's the one key thing I would say data can't tell us, only the person can.